Hello and welcome to the Focusing Way podcast. I'm your host, David Battistella. Please share this podcast with others as a way of introducing them to the people, themes, concepts, and beauty of focusing. All the links are on the website. Now, on to the good stuff. Today on the Focusing Way podcast, we open up into a new direction, speaking with non-focusers who, in their own unique way, have lived a focusing life. Many years ago, I joined a community website called Creative Cow. Eventually, I became a leader on that website, and I got to know Ron and Kathleen Lindeboom, the creators of it. They created an online community like no other, a place on the internet that was moderated and full of healthy discussion and media professionals sharing and helping one another. I caught up with Ron Lindeboom at his home in Arizona and had a wonderful conversation about community building and life. Ronald and Kathleen Lindeboom first pioneered web-based communities for media professionals in digital video in 1995, and from this early beginning grew a vital international community that grew to well over 2 million unique visitors a month under their leadership. As CEO of Creative Cow LLC and later the publisher of Creative Cow magazine, Ronald drew on a wide range of skills developed during his 40-year career in media, marketing, and business management. The Creative Cow website today serves over 1.3 million monthly unique visitors from around the world, even in a world of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and a myriad of other competitors. And now, here's part 2 of my conversation with Ronald Lindeboom. You sound like someone who's really listened to that inner voice when it presents itself to you. Like there's a certainty attached to it, and that all of a sudden the right direction and the right way forward is that thing. Can you talk about that?
Well, both Kathleen and I, where I knew I had found the right person was Kathleen told me her story one day, and she said, when I was a little girl, I had my invisible friend. And she said, because I was alone a lot, I had to have an invisible friend. And she said, call him Jesus Christ, call him God, call him whoever you want, but I knew that it was real and that I had this invisible friend who was with me always. And I learned to listen, and I learned to cherish the experience. And I'm the same. I had that same experience growing up in the house I did, which was, my mother was the Westinghouse girl, and she was a beauty, and she left my father with 4 kids, and my dad was a Pearl Harbor survivor who fought all through the South Pacific War and came home with a horrible case of PTSD and was very violent, but overcame his demons and ended his life as one of the most courageous and remarkable men I ever met, and I wouldn't have traded him for anything. But the wreckage along the way was pretty extreme, and things were not good. But I learned within that experience to cherish that. I would always say to myself as a little kid, and I would be falling asleep in the midst of all this horror, and I would just fall asleep telling myself, God doesn't make junk. God doesn't make junk. And I just knew that that we're not made for failure except as a teacher. I mean, the greatest teacher you can have is your failure. And you better make friends with failure because you're going to get a lot of it.
Hmm.
And you're going to hold hands with failure. You don't need to fear it. You really do have to make friends with it. And so we kind of have lived our lives like this, where we pulled in the spirit, where we've just really drawn in the spirit. What's the essence of what is in front of us? Because life is always talking to you, it's showing you the way to go. We're just terrible listeners a lot of the time.
That is such a beautiful thing you just said, and that's the essence of sort of focusing. Is the first thing you learn is how to listen, and and just going into that sort of space. But I also have to say those words back to you. God does not make junk. And the image that came into my mind as you were saying that of a young you saying, going to bed at night and saying, God does not make junk. And just the amount of the depth of that is, well, I'm just thanking you very much for sharing that. That's a lovely, lovely sentence. And I wanted to, because we've sort of, that sort of takes us nicely into this sort of, you've got this pretty amazing personal health story. And since focusing is a body centric practice, um, I was wondering if you could share the story about where your blood pressure, where it was a little while ago, and that how that forced a lifestyle change for you.
Well, for about at least 15 years, my health was failing. I mean, completely failing. I had fungus and mold through most of my organ systems. It was growing on my skin, it was growing in my brain. I had gliocladium in the brain, which is brain fungus. I had fungus in my ears that precipitated ear surgery. Uh, it just got worse and worse and worse. I was highly allergic to yeast, which had taken off and exploded. I was a carbaholic and didn't realize that my carb loading addiction was exacerbating the yeast problem. It was feeding the fungus and mold in my system. It was destroying my ears, my eyes, all of it. It was contributing to so many health problems that my blood pressure just skyrocketed until a year ago last month in April of of 2017. I was in the hospital here in Kingman, Arizona, with the highest blood pressure they had ever recorded. They were sure I was going to die, and it was pretty scary. And so I came home and I began researching my options because the doctor wanted to put me on statin drugs and all kinds of other things. They put me on calcium channel blockers, which when I read the side effects of calcium channel blockers, they gave you a six-fold increase in the chances that you would have a fatal first time heart attack.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, this is great. This is excellent. But I told my doctor there was no way I was going to take statin drugs because I knew what the side effects of those are, and those are a whole other level of toxicity and side effects and things that I just did not even want to go there. So I began to really look into options. And one day, it was the screwiest thing, David. It was sitting here watching YouTube videos on my smart TV, uh, and I'm watching videos on YouTube trying to research what kind of diet is going to help me. Well, I knew that my a lot of my health problems were rooted in carbs, so I started looking into the low carb things, and that led me to keto. And I started watching it, and it terrified me when I first watched it. It's truly scared me because I thought this is the craziest thing I have ever heard. But I understood the spiritual truth that sometimes the very thing that looks toxic is the very thing that works. And that kind of astounded me. And I thought, well, I'm going to keep listening here because I knew that what I was doing wasn't working. So I kept listening to Dr. Eric Berg, who's a chiropractor, who is a wonderful teacher on what keto really is. He is hardcore. He's a keto legalist, and he cuts you no slack. And all these, what they call lazy keto teachers, who you can kind of do keto and get away with it. That is not Dr. Eric Berg. Eric Berg is hardcore, and he is letter of the law keto. And that's what I needed. And so I started listening to his videos, and I went into Kathleen's office one day and I said, "You got to come out and listen to this." Because as you know, David, Kathleen is a licensed microbiologist who was a microscopist in the hospital labs and spent, a couple of decades working in the hospital labs. And I wanted her feedback on this. And I told her, I said, if I don't change radically, I'm going to be dead. And this is the craziest thing you're ever going to hear, but I need you to listen to this because there's safety in a multitude of counselors. And I need to know if I'm just being nuts here or if this is something that bears witness to you that this is going to work. Because I truly believe, David, that sometimes when the Spirit's talking to you, you hear things and you know it's the truth because that light goes on and you know this is true. The truth, Kathleen and I like to say it this way, the truth bears witness of itself. You hear it and you know it. And so I said, Kathleen, I need you to hear this because if I'm right, keto is going to give me the chance to let my body finally rest, to detoxify from its carb addiction, but also to give my hormones and my organs and my glands a chance to reboot, just like you'd reboot a computer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, sure enough, being a keto hardcore, you don't get it by being what they call lazy keto, where you mostly are a keto sympathizer. You're not going to get it until you truly lock down no starches, no grains, no fruits, a cup of berries a day because berries have a different kind of sugar and they metabolize differently than, say, oranges and grapefruits and peaches and plums. Those spike insulin. And the whole goal with keto is to turn off insulin because our bloodstream is saturated with far too much sugar to the point where our cells turn off the insulin receptors because the cells are becoming toxic in the presence of so much sugar that we only need 1 teaspoon of sugar across the entire body in a day, and yet we'll pound down a Coke, which is 30 grams of sugar, and
Mhm.
we'll drink 2 and 3 and 4 Cokes a day, some people do, and our bloodstream is so saturated in sugar that the cells literally have to turn off their insulin receptors, which makes us insulin resistant, which now our triglycerides explode, our blood pressure, our bad cholesterol is going up, and the next thing you know, we're in a mess. We're in a hospital bed in Kingman with the highest blood pressure they've ever recorded, 286 over 268.
Wow. And so as you go into this, how are you now listening to your body? Like, how is your body responding? What are you noticing as the day you decide to start going sort of hardcore?
Well, one of the first things I noticed was that the growth on my skin, the rosacea, the the psoriatic psoriasis sores, the lesions that I had been prone to from fighting so much mold and fungus in my system, those conditions went away. The rosacea went away. The scaling went away. And the blood pressure slowly began to drop. And just so many things. One of the first that I noticed was that if you were to close your hands and bring your fingers to make a fist, I couldn't get my fingers closer than about maybe an inch, maybe a little over an inch from actually closing. I couldn't close my fingers. The inflammation and arthritis had gotten so bad I couldn't close my fingers.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the first things I noticed, not only did I start losing weight and start losing fast, but now I can totally close my fingers. I don't even have to try, it just happens quite easily. The puffiness went away, my inflammatory condition went away, the brain clarity greatly increased. Uh, the more I'm on it, we've only been doing this now. We tried vegan, we tried vegetarian, we tried every kind of diet, and my weight just kept going up. My blood pressure kept going up. It just kept going up higher and higher. In fact, when I ended up in the hospital, I was eating pretty dang close to a pure vegan diet. We did have meat from time to time, but it was pretty close, and yet we just kept getting more and more weight, more and more, you know, it's those starches and sugars and carbs that were doing me in, because I love breads, I love grains, and they were just not being kind to me. And in being very hardcore, it got to where I even noticed that the ringing in my ears, the tinnitus that I had that was so horribly bad, even the tinnitus dropped.
Wow. What did your doctor say?
My cardiologist was shocked. Uh, when I first told him what I was going to do, he literally got angry at me. He lost his temper. He became verbally quite intense, mocking me. Uh, and I didn't care. I just thought, well, you know, just another M deity who thinks they're God. And I love that term, the M deities. And, just another, self focused doctor who thinks they have all the answer when they take a 1 week course in diet and in labs. And, how they can claim to have all the answers is beyond me. I just don't know how you can become the expert in everything with a 1 week course.
Mm-hmm.
My life has never given me that kind of result. I have to work hard to gain little victories along the way. So my doctor, the second time I went back to him, which was pretty recent, uh, my weight had dropped to the point where instead of 205, I'm now down to about 145. So I've dropped 60 pounds, and he was shocked. The second time I went in, he looked at me and said, "You meant what you said." And I said, "Yes, I did." And
Mm-hmm.
he said, "I'm sorry to have been mocking you, but you don't realize how many people come in and tell me they're going to do what you did, and then they never do." He said, "I'm used to people telling me what they're going to do, and I never see the results." He said, "You, on the other hand," he said, "this is incredible."
Mm-hmm.
And it's much easier to keep the weight off, David, when you're a fat burner. When you're truly in ketosis and you're what is called fat adapted, you don't have to struggle to keep weight off. You aren't struggling, and that's the thing that is so amazing about keto. Is I know a number of people that are friends of mine that are doing keto and literally are fat adapted, and they all say the same thing: I don't struggle with my diet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I might ask you to lay out like a day, like a typical day for you, what it looks like, what your meals look like, just for, which we can include on the blog on that page, so people can check it out. Maybe you could send me that separately. Um,
I I will definitely send you some formulas for a day. I mean, a lot of people think of the keto diet as the bacon diet. That's what people call it, some people. And the truth of the matter is if you're really doing keto correctly, yes, you eat bacon. Yes, you eat eggs. Yes, you can have the good fats, the coconut oil, the olive oil. But what you're really eating is 7 to 10 cups of green leafy vegetables a day. And if you aren't eating the 7 to 10 cups of green leafy vegetables a day, you really aren't doing keto. You think you're doing keto. You may be eating a lot of bacon, but you're not on keto,
mm,
because that's what Dr. Eric Berg will teach you, is that the whole point, uh, if you're truly doing keto, you won't get a fatty liver. If you're doing lazy keto, you're going to end up with a fatty liver.
mhm, mhm. Well, I mean, it's fascinating, and I've seen some of Dr. Berg's videos. Did you ever reach out to him to share your story, or?
He's such a rock star that
Yeah.
I just, you know, I'm sure he gets 250 letters a day telling him, "Dr. Berg, you changed my life."
Mm. Well, there's another doctor that I learned about through, a Facebook group you have. That's Dr. Raymond Rife, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Um, can you tell me a bit about his research and how that also, if it does, work into this?
Well, Dr. Royal Raymond Rife, and we all call him Royal Rife, triple R's. And he was a researcher who studied the concept of frequency therapy and the fact that, as Einstein says, when matter slows down, or when light slows down and becomes matter, it oscillates, it vibrates at different vibratory rates, and different organisms are, we're all living an electrical life where all matter is vibrating. It has its own resonant frequency. Uh, you know, a paramecium, for example, is vibrating at a different rate than, say, the cells in your heart. They're two distinct life forms. And what the whole principle of frequency therapy is one of specificity. If I know exactly what the oscillatory rate of this microbe, this pathogen is, and if I can bomb it with a device that hits it with its own resonant frequency, I can so super excite that organism that I can cause its own physiology to just rupture and what Royal Rife would call devitalize the organism. He couldn't say that he cured a disease because that would get him in trouble with the FDA and the AMA. So he said, I'll devitalize these organisms. Well, that's how I bought myself enough time to find these answers, was that when I was fighting fungus and mold and yeast, I was using frequency therapy to keep these things under control because the resonant frequency of these organisms is known. And so I was using the device that I have called the GB4000, and I used the GB4000 for years to treat these infections and these outbreaks so that they didn't completely kill me because, fungus and mold and yeast are virulent pathogens, and they will destroy you. In fact, one time in Alabama, I ended up in the emergency room at Stringfellow Hospital in Anniston, Alabama, with my lungs shutting down because they were full of black mold. And so when the doctor diagnosed that, one of the things that I did was bomb the heck out of it with the Rife device, and it was really quite an incredible time. And as you know from being a part of the group, there's people in there that doctors have written them off. In fact, the doctor at Stringfellow told me to go home. There was nothing he could do for me, and that I needed to get my affairs in order, that having black mold in your lungs was going to kill me. And I told him, no, it isn't. And that was in 2013, and we're now in 2018. So I think I was right and he wasn't.
Yeah. And just so people understand, Rife was also worked at Zeiss Optics, I believe, and built a microscope that could magnify 60,000 times. But the thing about his microscope, and correct me anywhere if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, his microscope allowed him to view things while they were still alive, whereas an electron microscope actually kills some of the pathogens or the microorganisms so that you can only see how they behave while they are, well, you would not be able to observe how they behave. You could view them in their dead state. And so from what I understood, he sort of sat at this microscope and hit these pathogens with frequencies and observed their reaction and sat there for sometimes days at a time documenting and trying to find the right frequency for every pathogen. Does that sort of sum it up a little bit?
You know your story very well, David. I commend you for your research because uh, one of the ways to describe it was Dr. Arthur Kendall, who was from Northwestern University, who was one of the great microscopists and researchers of his time back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. He was very good friends with Royal Rife and was the originator of what is called Kindle medium, which the Kindle medium is how uh, people in the lab filter uh, different organisms out and grow organisms in the petri dish using the Kindle medium, so they get all the other organisms out so they can make sure that they have the pure organism that they're wanting to try to culture, is to this day still done using the Kindle medium. And when I first learned about Royal Rife and his friendship with Arthur Kendall and Dr. Milbank, who was the head of the California Medical Insurance Board at the time, who were who were friends and compatriots with Royal Rife and helped him set up his studies and they worked with him. These were men of renown in their time, and they once said about Royal Rife, if you want to know what patience is, it's a picture of Royal Rife sitting at his microscope, sometimes for 2 3 days at a whack, just studying the behavior of a microbe where his microscope didn't use light under it like a standard microscope. He couldn't do that because it wouldn't work at those magnifications. So what he did is he had to use the internal light, the internal electricity, and use quartz to angle the way that these uh, quartz facets aligned to amplify the organism's light, which gave them, almost like we know from astrophysics, that objects moving away are one color, objects moving toward us are another color, the Doppler effect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was watching a Doppler effect under that microscope to where he could see the resonant light in this organism, and it would give him an educated starting point of the oscillatory rate of the vibration of this organism. And so he would fine tune it and be hitting it with this frequency to watch its behavior. And imagine his surprise the first time when he watched one just completely become immotile. It just stopped it dead in its tracks, and then it just began to shake, and then it ruptured. And he went, "Oh my goodness." But it didn't hurt any of the other tissue around it if he was experimenting with other things on the cell, because the thing that I said earlier about specificity is that if I know the frequency of fungus is not the frequency of the cells in my lungs, for example. So I can bomb the fungus and I can bomb the mold without hurting my own tissue because my tissue doesn't vibrate at the rate that mold and fungus vibrates. So this was the principle that Royal Rife was working on He paid a heavy price for his research. They drove him out of business. They seized his lab without a court order. They destroyed his writings. They destroyed his equipment, but they couldn't destroy what Arthur Kendall and Dr. Milbanks and all these other men had left in their wake. And some of the doctors who had these machines that Royal Rife invented left the country rather than surrender them. Well, fast forward a few decades, and what's happening today is people all over the world are making these machines. They're sharing information about their own research because while we don't have Royal Rife's microscope and we can't for certainty view things in the living state like he did, we can use devices and report to one another when you're in a life-threatening circumstance. You know if something works or doesn't work, because if it does work, you live, and if it doesn't work, you die. So that's the bottom line. And so you find groups like the GB 4000 users group on Facebook and many other groups around the world. There's just thousands and thousands of these groups with hundreds of thousands of people that now know the story of Royal Rife and share their experience and share their own research. And we've gotten to the point where it's become a therapy that is growing and growing and growing. And while it scares the heck out of people that think it's a conspiracy theory, or they try to put it on the level with alien abduction and wearing tinfoil hats, the truth of the matter is that, like Kathleen and I like to say, all the good eating is in behind the scarecrows.
Stay tuned for part 3 of my conversation with Ronald Lindeboom. You've been listening to the Focusing Way podcast. For links and to subscribe, visit our website at thefocusingway.com. Follow us on Twitter at thefocusingway. Please share this podcast with others as a way of introducing them to the people, themes, concepts, and beauty of focusing. If you really enjoy this and want to support us, you can support us using Patreon as well. Until next time, I'm your host, David Battistella.